You won't believe what this gorilla did to save a life. What happens in the next 60 seconds will leave you speechless. The jungle was alive with sound. The distant shriek of parrots cutting through humid air. The rustle of ancient leaves whispering secrets older than memory itself. Dr. Sarah Mitchell had been studying the mountain gorillas of the Virunga forests for 3 years, but nothing in her research had prepared her for what was about to unfold on that sweltering Tuesday morning. She adjusted her camera lens, focusing on the silverback they called Bwenge. The name meant wisdom in the local dialect, and watching him now, she understood why. Bwenge sat on a moss-covered boulder, his massive frame catching fragments of golden sunlight that filtered through the canopy. His dark eyes surveyed his family group with the careful attention of a seasoned guardian. But something was different today. Bwenge's head tilted suddenly, his nostrils flaring as he tested the air. The other gorillas continued their morning routine, grooming, playing, foraging, but the silverback had gone completely still. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. In 3 years, she'd learned to read his body language like a book, and right now, every muscle in his 400-pound body was tense with focus. Then she heard it too. A sound that didn't belong in the jungle's natural symphony. A whimper, faint, human, and coming from somewhere beyond the thick wall of vegetation to the east. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. No tourists were scheduled in this sector today. No research teams. No guides. This part of the forest was supposed to be empty of humans except for her small observation post. Bwenge rose slowly, his movements deliberate and controlled. The other gorillas noticed now, their chatter falling silent as they watched their leader. He took one step toward the sound, then another, his massive hands parting ferns with surprising delicacy. Sarah knew she should maintain her distance, rule number 1 of gorilla research, but something in Bwenge's demeanor compelled her to follow, her camera rolling. The whimpering grew louder. Through a break in the foliage, Sarah saw something that made her heart drop into her stomach. A child. A little boy, no more than 4 or 5 years old, sat at the bottom of a steep ravine, his leg twisted at an unnatural angle beneath him. His face was streaked with tears and dirt, his clothes torn from what must have been a terrible fall. He clutched a small wooden toy, a carved elephant, in his trembling hands. But that wasn't the worst part. Circling the ravine just 20 feet from the boy was a full-grown leopard. Its spotted coat rippled with lean muscle as it paced, golden eyes fixed on the injured child with predatory calculation. The boy was too young to understand the danger, but his instincts made him press his back against the rocky wall, making himself as small as possible. Sarah's mind raced. She needed to call for help, to radio the ranger station, to do something, but her radio was back at camp, a 15-minute sprint through dangerous terrain. The leopard's tail twitched. It lowered its head, preparing to descend into the ravine. And then Bwenge moved. The silverback exploded forward with shocking speed, his knuckles pounding the earth like thunder. The sound echoed through the jungle, a primal drumbeat that seemed to shake the very trees. He positioned himself at the edge of the ravine, directly between the leopard and the child, and released a roar that Sarah felt in her chest cavity. The leopard froze, ears flattening against its skull. For a moment, time seemed to suspend itself. 2 apex predators, face to face, both capable of incredible violence. The leopard's muscles coiled, its lips pulling back to reveal ivory fangs. Sarah's finger pressed the record button, her hands shaking so badly the image blurred. Bwenge didn't charge. Instead, he did something Sarah had never seen in years of gorilla research. He stood up to his full height, over 6 feet of pure power, and began to beat his chest with open palms. The sound was like cannon fire, each impact resonating through the forest, but it wasn't a display of aggression. His eyes never left the leopard, but his stance was protective, not predatory. He was making himself bigger, more formidable, a living wall between predator and prey. The message was clear: you'll have to go through me first. The leopard hesitated, packing once more along the ravine's edge. Sarah held her breath. She'd seen leopards take down prey twice their size, but she'd also seen gorillas demonstrate strength that defied comprehension. The standoff stretched for what felt like an eternity but was probably only 30 seconds. Then, with a final hiss of frustration, the leopard retreated into the undergrowth. But Bwenge didn't relax. If anything, he became more alert, scanning the jungle for any sign of the predator's return. The other gorillas from his family group began to arrive, drawn by his alarm calls. They formed a perimeter around the ravine, a living fortress. And then Bwenge looked down at the child. Sarah watched through her viewfinder as something extraordinary happened. The massive silverback's expression softened. His dark eyes, which moments ago had blazed with protective fury, now held something that looked remarkably like concern. He grunted softly, not a threat vocalization, but the low, rumbling sound mothers make to comfort their infants. The boy looked up at the gorilla towering above him and did something that made Sarah's eyes fill with tears. He smiled. Through pain and fear and confusion, this child smiled at the massive creature that had just saved his life. And then, still clutching his wooden elephant, the boy lifted his free hand and waved. Bwenge tilted his head, studying the child with intense curiosity. Slowly, carefully, he began to descend into the ravine. Sarah's radio training screamed at her to intervene. Gorillas and humans should never interact this closely, but her researcher's intuition kept her silent and watching. The silverback moved with impossible gentleness for a creature his size. He placed each hand and foot with deliberate precision, testing the rocky surface before committing his weight. When he reached the bottom, he sat down several feet from the boy, giving him space, watching him with those ancient, intelligent eyes. The boy tried to move toward Bwenge, but pain shot through his injured leg and he cried out. Tears spilled down his cheeks again, and he dropped the wooden elephant in his distress. What happened next defied everything Sarah thought she knew about gorillas. Bwenge reached out with one massive hand and gently picked up the fallen toy. His fingers, capable of bending steel bars, cradled the small carved elephant with the delicacy of a jeweler handling a diamond. He examined it for a moment, turning it over in his palm. Then carefully, so carefully, extended his arm toward the child. The boy's eyes went wide. He looked at the toy, then at Bwenge, then back at the toy. With a trembling hand, he reached out and took the elephant from the gorilla's palm. Their fingers touched for just a moment, human and gorilla, child and protector. Bwenge made another soft sound, then did something that made Sarah gasp aloud. He began to groom the child's hair, his enormous fingers moving with the same gentle precision he used with his own offspring. It was a gesture of comfort, of family, of belonging, the universal language of primates showing care. The boy leaned into the touch, his crying subsiding into quiet hiccups. And there, at the bottom of that ravine, with danger still lurking in the surrounding jungle, a bond formed that transcended species. Sarah finally found her voice. "I'm here," she called softly, not wanting to startle either the gorilla or the child. "Help is coming." Bwenge looked up at her, and Sarah could have sworn she saw understanding in his eyes. He grunted once, a sound she'd learned meant acknowledgement, then positioned himself to block the most vulnerable approach to the ravine. He was standing guard. For the next 45 minutes, as Sarah radioed for help and a rescue team made their way through the jungle, Bwenge didn't move from his post. The other gorillas maintained their perimeter, rotating shifts like trained sentries. Every time the boy whimpered in pain, Bwenge would look down at him and make that soft, rumbling sound of comfort. When the rescue team finally arrived, rangers, medics, and the boy's frantic mother, Bwenge watched carefully as they descended into the ravine. He didn't interfere, but he didn't leave either. Only when the medic had splinted the child's leg and they began to carry him up and out of the ravine did the silverback finally relax. As the boy was lifted past Bwenge, he reached out and touched the gorilla's shoulder. "Thank you," he whispered in Swahili. His mother, tears streaming down her face, pressed her hands together and bowed deeply to the massive silverback. Bwenge watched them go, sitting perfectly still until they disappeared from view. Then, with a final glance around the ravine, he led his family back into the depths of the forest. The boy, whose name was Jabari, made a full recovery. His mother explained that he'd wandered away from their village early that morning, chasing a butterfly into the forest. He'd slipped while trying to climb a tree and fallen into the ravine, where he'd lain for hours before Bwenge found him. Sarah's footage became the centerpiece of a documentary that would change conservation funding in the region forever. But more than that, it changed hearts. People around the world watched as Bwenge, this supposedly wild and dangerous animal, demonstrated empathy, intelligence, and heroism that many humans couldn't match. 6 months later, Sarah received permission to return to Bwenge's territory with a special visitor. Jabari, now walking perfectly on his healed leg, carried with him a gift, a new wooden elephant, this one larger and more detailed than the first, carved by his grandfather. When they found Bwenge's group, the silverback looked up from his foraging. His eyes met Jabari's across the clearing, and Sarah would later swear she saw recognition flash across that massive face. Jabari placed the wooden elephant on a rock near the edge of the clearing, bowed just as his mother had done, and whispered words that Sarah caught on her microphone. For wisdom, for protection, for family. Bwenge watched the boy leave, then approached the carving. He picked it up in his huge hands, studied it for a long moment, then carried it to a spot near his resting area, where he placed it carefully among the roots of an ancient tree. It remained there for years, protected by the gorilla family, a small wooden elephant guarding the guardians. The truth is, we don't give animals enough credit for the depth of their emotions, the sophistication of their thoughts, or the capacity of their hearts. Bwenge didn't save Jabari because he was trained to, or because he expected a reward. He did it because, in that moment, he saw a vulnerable member of his extended primate family in danger, and his instinct, his heart, told him to protect. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to remember that kindness exists in the most unexpected places, that heroes don't always look the way we expect them to, and that the bonds between all living things run deeper than we know. Because sometimes, wisdom comes in a 400-pound package, sitting in the jungle, holding a wooden elephant with the gentleness of a father, reminding us all what it truly means to be human.